Good morning, my name is Aranza Juarez, and me and my team are going to talk about our research project named Cuba, the Silent Country, Unraveling the Veil of Corruption. But first, let me introduce you to what is corruption. According to Transparency International, corruption is the abuse of an entrusted power for private gain.
So, why is this important? In question of the motivation of carrying out this work, we have to take in account the following points presented on the screen. First, erode trust. This mainly because as a team, we would like to be able to provide quality information to generate a sense of trust with the reader and inform about the current status and analysis of corruption in Cuba. Likewise, in the second instance, we will consider it important to lower community confidence in public authorities in order to be able to more deeply understand the situation of Cuba's vulnerability to corruption. In the same way, we consider that the topic of the loss of goods and services in Cuban society is important to the development of Cuban society. Also, we consider it of utmost importance to inform and generate awareness in the current situation of the Caribbean country, for which we seek to address this issue from a social perspective to better understand the effects of corruption here. Last but not least, we seek to not repeat the same mistakes and provide the quality of life of the inhabitants of the region. Our proposal to create this paper can be put into these mainly four bullet points, such as understanding the history and culture. The current situation can help us to understand its political, social, and economic evolution. This includes understanding the Cuban Revolution, its leaders, the policies implemented, and their impact on Cuban society. Studying corruption in Cuba is fundamental to understanding its impact on society, the economy, human rights, and the political system. Also, search and analyze the current situation of corruption in Cuba to better understand how to address these problems. Present a work in which it's the most important information about this problem and the lack of transparency in its compiled in order to correctly expose the current problems of the country, as well as the affected sectors. And finally, understand in a deeper way the relationship of the corruption with other sectors. For example, society, economy, and education, and how these go hand in hand for the optimal growth of the country.
In the pursuit of comprehensively addressing the issue of corruption in Cuba, we have employed the documenting research methodology as a guiding framework for our essay. This approach emphasizes meticulous documentation of information from multiple sources, ranging from official government reports to independent investigations and scholarly analysis. By systematically gathering and organizing data, we aim to construct a better understanding of the multifaceted aspects of corruption within the Cuban context. Likewise, the development of this work was carried out in different parts in order to obtain this result. The activity we carried out were our research proposal, annotated bibliography, outline, and finally, our first draft.
Moving on to our first data, we have this graph, which is called Control of Corruption Estimate Comparison, that compares Cuba's control of corruption estimate with Asia, Europe, Canada, Mexico, United States of America, and Venezuela, using the criteria of -2, meaning highly corrupt, and 4, meaning very clean. Cuba's score is -0.01, and it is almost in the middle of the range between highly corrupt and very clean countries. But how can we be sure about the accuracy of this score? Cuba has small scale of retail corrupt acts. This type of corruption is in the street, in the neighborhoods, in companies, and institutions. It is like a mechanism for them of survival. It is all informal, and the Cubans use them to basically subsist. Therefore, corruption in Cuba has been normalized in different contexts, and sometimes the perception of it can be altered. Our next graph is called Electoral Democracy Index, which seeks to incorporate the fundamental value of making rules sensitive to citizens, achieved through electoral competition for the electoral's approval. The score is measured from low to high, 0 to 1, and we can see that Cuba is in the lower line into the graph. And according to our research, this is due to the fact that the PCC has monopolized government and politics in Cuba since the mid-1960s, which do not allow electoral competition and democratic transfer of power. The last graph is distribution by socioeconomic position, which in this section answers 3 points. And the first one is access to public services distributed by socioeconomic position. That answers the question, is access to basic public services like security, primary education, clean water, and healthcare distributed equally according to socioeconomic position? The next important point is the access to state business opportunities by socioeconomic position, which refers to the ability to compete for and receive a public contract to partner with the government in public-private partnerships. And the last one is the access to jobs by socioeconomic positions, which answers the question, are state jobs equally open to qualified individuals regardless of their socioeconomic position? Now, looking at these three, we can see that they are pretty stable. And according to the graph from 2020 to 2021, there was a decrease in numbers because in the earliest 2020, like we all know, COVID-19 hit the country as well in the whole world. And Cuba faced a negative economic scenario because of the blockade measures that Trump forced Cuba to close borders and also stop economic activities.
Among the other evidence we have found are some of the global anti-corruption organization and anti-corruption treaties to which Cuba was related to. For example, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, but in 2007 they ratified. Also, the Organization of the American States, in which Cuba was a founding member, but was suspended from January of 1962 to June of 2009. And also the Interpol. In the latter, Cuba continues to be a participant since its founding in June of 1952. Another one of our finds is the Electoral Democracy Index, in which Cuba presents a very bad result with 0.18 points. Corruption in Cuban elections is a complex and controversial issue. Since Cuba is a single-party country, the Communist Party of Cuba plays a central role in the political system and has a significant influence on the electoral process. Corruption can manifest itself in form of manipulation of electoral processes, such as the use of state resources to favor PCC candidates, lack of transparency in vote counting, and coercion to ensure participation and support of the ruling party. In 2009, President Castro established the Comptroller General's Office as a part of an initiative to modernize Cuban socialist economic model and enhance the efficiency of the public sector. The problem of corruption still persists, particularly in the trade, restaurant, and food industries, where approximately half of all corruption cases were identified. These incidents primarily involved the misappropriation of public funds, the unlawful sale of goods, and the unlawful accumulation of wealth. Havana, Holguin, and Santiago de Cuba, the three most populous provinces, counted for the majority of these cases. Cuba has implemented various measures to combat corruption within social political landscape. The government has established anti-corruption agencies and frameworks, such as the Comptroller General of the Republic, to oversee public administration and investigate allegations of corruption. Additionally, there have been efforts to enhance transparency and accountability through legal reforms and anti-corruption legislations. These measures aim to strengthen institutional integrity and discourage corrupt practices. However, the effectiveness of these initiatives is a subject of ongoing debate, as challenges persist in the form of bureaucratic hurdles, limited access to information, and concerns about the independence of anti-corruption institutions. In examining Cuba's anti-corruption measure, it is essential to critically evaluate their impact and identify areas of improvement to foster a more robust and sustainable anti-corruption framework.
Models or theories. The rational choice theory is if the advantage is greater than the consequence, there will be corruption. But if the consequence is greater than the advantage, there is less chance to commit fraud. So, in the context of Cuba, if a government official or individuals are seeking to enhance their financial well-being by exploiting their position for personal gain. For instance, an official might accept bribes to overlook certain activities or to expedite bureaucratic processes. The personal gain in this case serves as a rational motive under RCT. Another theory that could help us to understand this situation is the neutralization theory, that in other words are people gaslighting themselves to think they do corrupt practices in order to survive. For example, corrupt individuals may argue that the financial, the economic, and political conditions in Cuba are forcing them to do corrupt acts in meant to survive. The corruption of neutralization theory aids in understanding how individuals engaging in corrupt activity might psychologically justify their action. Lastly, the contingent behavior theory. This means if the more people participate in corruption, it's going to be normalized and more people will contribute in corruption. This could be related by the actions previously mentioned by my colleagues. Since the fact that the most people are corrupt not only encourages them to be corrupt, but also suggests that it's the only way available to survive and the only way to move forward to be successfully and be economically, socially, or politically speaking.
Our applications of corruption in this research can be seen in different ways, but to mention some of them, the first one and most evident, I think, is When we take into example the everyday life of a Cuban, their average official salaries are extremely low because of their high inflation the country faces. And also, we know that Cuba has one of the most restrictive media environments in the world. The formal media sector is owned and also mainly controlled by the state. The next important point that I want to talk about is the lack of transparency in elections, that we made clear that none of Cuba's nominally elected officials are chosen through free and fair contestants. It's more like a PCC control commission designates all these candidates. And also, Cuba has lack of effective laws that provide freedom of information and access to official records. And last but not least are the theories that my classmate mentioned that we use to help us to understand the way people interact and why do they take the decisions they make.
In conclusion, the effects of corruption in Cuba is a complex and multifaceted issue that impacts various aspects of society. Effects in Cuba are far-reaching, influencing the trust in government, economic development, and overall quality of life. Corruption limits opportunities for economic and social mobility to access certain benefits, opportunity creating of unfairness and equality in society. Corruption may also contribute to an underground economy and a culture of informality, making it difficult to track economic activities accurately. By heart, we have mentioned many graphics that compare the level of corruption in Cuba between Cuba and other countries. We believe that Cuba has a lack of participation in global organization that fights corruption.